This Hangout on Air is now live.
It is live.
It's exciting. All right, let's see. I'm refreshing the home page. Yeah, see, this is what I'm worried about if I got the embed wrong.
Why? How could it possibly be wrong, though?
Trust me. because I left and came back in.
Oh.
And yeah, that's what I was saying.
Oh, did you do it for
when
a
I
different
renamed
thing?
it? No, it's the same one, but I don't know if it changed it. Here, let me just.
Okay, hang on. Hang on. Where's my accounts gone?
And there's that. Yeah, it changes the ID.
Okay. Well.
When you change the name. Okay, so now I will go back to live. I will go back to there. Save. No, actually, it does look like it's the same.
Well, yeah, no one's seeing us. I'm not seeing.
Well, all right.
What did you do?
It says live on my screen. I've invited you. You're on the call. It says live.
I'm not in the call.
It says 39 viewers.
Yeah, but there's no video.
Okay, so let me, how should I get you the link?
It's saying that they can see it on YouTube.
Oh, all right then.
But I don't.
Do you need to?
I guess I have to take their word for it because it's unusual. Usually we see everything, it's perfectly fine. So people say they can see it on live ASP.NET. I'm not seeing anything. So, all right.
Oh yeah, when I hit play.
Well, I did all that.
Okay.
But, all right.
It's working for me.
Cool.
Okay.
It's working now.
Hooray.
Yep, it's working everywhere now. I had to hit refresh everywhere, apparently.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, wow. So we have Powell there.
Hello.
Hello. So, see, it's weird without having Scott to like talk about random things.
I can talk about random things. You'd have, like, come on, like, you got to stretch.
What's a random thing?
Well, so I have been complaining about my phone a lot the last few weeks. I updated to Android 8 Oreo. And so I cracked it last night and finally just reset the phone, which is I was trying to avoid because resetting a phone obviously is a little annoying. But the couple hours was worth it because it's been absolutely brilliant since then. So, and Bluetooth even worked on my car this morning, which was the big thing I'd been missing the last 3 weeks. I was so out of touch because I hadn't been able to listen to podcasts.
That's with Oreo?
Oreo. I don't know how to say it.
Oreo.
Oreo.
Yes.
Oreo.
O-R-E-O.
Oreo, yes.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's good. I'm happy about that. And there's some like mixed reality Windows event this morning in San Francisco.
I saw one tweet. I saw one tweet.
It's the most low-key event I've ever seen. But like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see what they're going to announce. I have no idea. And then tomorrow, Google announces new phone. So I'm all ready for all those things.
That is exciting.
So exciting. So exciting.
I've been messing with updates on the .NET Foundation website using ASP.NET Core 2 and rating code of yours from live.asp.NET repo, which is good.
Oh, nice. I still haven't deployed the 2.0 version of live ASP.NET yet.
Yeah.
I got sidetracked by having to update it for all the European cookie compliance stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's fun, huh?
That kind of derailed my 2.0 upgrade. So now I have to go back and rebase all the 2.0 stuff on all the cookie stuff, and I just haven't had a chance yet. But we'll get there. We'll get there. But we're here today to talk about SignalR Alpha.
Well, let me show. Should I show my community links?
No one cares about your community links, John.
Oh no, they're exciting this week.
Okay, all right. I'll let you show your community links.
I'm making an exception. They're exciting.
Okay, people are saying that the microphone is a little sensitive today. I did change the mode on the microphone because there's two people. I think I put it in stereo mode. I think. Let me change it back. And I think maybe that one. We'll see if that's better. I just switched the mode so whoever is commenting can tell me whether it sounds better.
Awesome. Okay, well, this one's interesting. Hisham saying he wanted to use ViewBag, and it wasn't available in Razor pages, and he saw that.
Why? You know why? You know why it's not
Offhand, no.
available in Razor Pages? Because I hate ViewBag.
Ah.
So I said, don't put it on Pages.
Nice.
And someone logged an issue and said, how dare you, like put your opinions into the framework? And I'm like, well, I'm the boss. So I get to decide what goes on there, and I don't like ViewBag. So well, you can add it back.
Yeah. So you can add it back with like a few lines of code, but it does make sense. The proper way of passing data is using a page model, right? I mean, that's the...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ViewBag, you have to use view data to pass stuff between pages and layout pages. Mm-hmm. There really isn't any other first-class way of doing that. We do intend to fix that at some point, but today that's kind of the only way. And ViewBag is just the dynamic, like C# dynamic way of doing that, instead of using view data. But ViewBag is using dynamic this way just makes me sad. So,
all right. Yeah. So here's the post. If you want to make Damien sad, you can use this code.
No, do whatever makes you happy, but I get to decide what's class in the framework.
All right. So here's a nice one from Andrew Locke, and he's going through creating and trusting a self-signed cert on Linux with Kestrel and ASP.NET Core.
Excellent.
And yeah, so this is nice. This is kind of walking through, creating it using OpenSSL, and some kind of interesting like in-depth specifics on what you need to do to trust it, etc.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I will say that we're also looking at doing all this for you by default in the next version.
Oh.
So that nice. When for getting local development working, like today, this works on Windows with IS Express because Visual Studio installs IS Express, and IS Express installs a self-signed certificate. Visual Studio already, on first launch, Visual Studio will mark it as trusted so that it works in the browser. And we want to replicate that experience from the command line on a Mac and on Linux. And so we're looking at ways that we could do that with new APIs in .NET Core 2.1, et cetera, et cetera. So, but until then, you're going to have to do it all manually using something like OpenSSL.
Yep, cool. Okay, so this one is an interesting one from Francesco. So he noticed that he wanted to use the ASP.NET Core with SPA services, and out of the box, file new project, you just see Angular and React, and he wanted to use Knockout. And so he shows how to do that using the SPA templates, and then kind of walks through, what you can do with Knockout and building an application with Knockout.
So, very good.
Kind of neat. So this one is from Rostislav, and he's just walking through what they did in upgrading an application to ASP.NET Core 2. I think this is always, nice to see when people show, here's what we did in our specific application. There's some standard things you'll see as far as, updating. And then he digs into a little bit of things that were important for them with changes for authentication. So,
that's good. Nice.
Yeah, just useful as as you're thinking about updating your projects to ASP.NET Core 2. It's nice to see some of these kind of things people call out. It's also nice to see that these are short blog posts. Like it's usually relatively pretty smooth, so that's nice. Okay, so this one from Junas, he wanted to find out if a URL matches an action in ASP.NET Core, and so he's using the iRoute collection and querying it to see if it's there. So it's just useful if you want to, before you maybe show a link, or if you want to just figure that out ahead of time, that's how you can do that. This was cool. I just saw this come by. So the ASP.NET Core docs in docs.microsoft.com have enabled bilingual view on hover and edit. And so what this means is we have a lot of international viewers on here, and it would be great to have people start going in and translating and improving the translations here. So that's kind of cool.
Very good.
This is a neat one. Scott Hanselman pointed this out to me. Adi has been just cranking away, creating tons of really cool videos. So he's over in Lagos, Nigeria. I hadn't realized how strong the Lagos ASP.NET and just .NET Core community is. They just had a .NET Conf Live or local event there, and so I've been kind of following these folks more. But so just looking at Adi, he's created tons and tons of videos, and just showing how he's building things using ASP.NET Core. So
that's great.
So this one's from Laurent, and he's talking about debugging into the ASP.NET Core 2.0 source code. I'd actually meant to feature this previously, and I forgot. I closed the tag. So here he's just showing about loading from the simple server and debugging into it. So cool. And finally, here is one from Jürgen, and he's doing a walkthrough on unit testing an ASP.NET Core application. Some things I like about this. One is he shows off using the test host, so he's got an XUnit project and he's using the test host. So let me skip down to that. So here's his test project. Calls out using the test host for that. And then he's doing some interesting things. He's pulling in some libraries like genfoo and fluent assertions. So genfoo is nice because it's a nice way to create a lot of test data. So he says, I want a bunch of test people, and here's create all those. And then he also uses fluent assertions, and he shows off some nice things along the way, like live unit testing. So showing how that works. So I believe somewhere in here is the genfoo thing. So that's kind of cool too. So this is kind of a nice getting started. It's a little bit more than file new project, but it's simple enough. You can get started using that. And cool. I am done sharing my screen. Now let's see the excitement.
All right.
All right. So for those who don't know, we released, well, Pavel basically did, and the rest of the SignalR team. I had nothing to do with it. A SignalR alpha for SignalR for ASP.NET Core. Now, SignalR for ASP.NET Core is a complete rewrite. We are effectively, well, not even effectively, we are practically rewriting the entire system from the ground up. Fowler and I did a talk about this at Build earlier this year, so it's worth going have a look, but a bunch of stuff has changed since then. This alpha in particular was designed to work on ASP.NET Core 2. So if you're using ASP.NET Core 2.0, which was released, what, a couple months ago now, or a month ago now, then this is designed to work on top of that. Although the final SignalR RTM version for this will actually be as part of the ASP.NET Core 2.1 release, but we are hoping to do at least another alpha for people on 2.0 so that we can get some feedback before the first 2.1 preview comes out. Don't ask if it's production ready. It's an alpha. All right. So your tolerance for production is your tolerance for production, but I am not going to say this is production ready. It's not. All right. It's going to change. It'll have bugs. This is for people to give us feedback on the direction that we're going, to find issues that we may not be aware of. More specifically, we're obviously interested in design issues more than actual implementation issues. It's an alpha after all. We'll find the implementation issues, but we want feedback on the design and the direction. So please do try it out. If you've been waiting for SignalR and you can carve away some time from your normal day-to-day, it'd be great if you could try it out and let us know. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Pavel and he will show us some stuff.
All right. First, let me talk a little bit about changes, because as Damian said, is a rewrite. And we decided to make a number of changes that, remove some features, add new features, so it's not the same thing as it was before. And also, because of that, it's not compatible, meaning you cannot run the old SignalR client with a new server, or vice versa. You cannot run the new client with the old server. It just won't work. So you can try, and I tell you that it just won't work. So let's take a look a little bit at the biggest changes that we made. I actually wrote this announcement for the Alpha 2 release, and it does have most of the stuff. So I will just go over it and tell a little bit about each of these things. First, we have the new JavaScript client. This was one of the biggest pain points people have with the old stack, or JavaScript client dependent on jQuery. And this dependency, many people didn't want this dependency, and it also made it difficult to take the JavaScript client outside the browser. So now we don't have jQuery anymore. The new client is written in TypeScript, so it's much nicer to use. That if you have a TypeScript application, you can just use it, and it's very nice to use. We also changed the way we distribute the client. The main distribution mechanism for the new client is NPM. So we now ship on NPM, and you use NPM to install the client. We are planning to put it also on CDN, but as I said, like NPM is the main way to consuming the client, and it does have both JavaScript version for browsers and TypeScript that you can use if you have a TypeScript project. Now, with regards to the features of the server and the client, one of the things that we dropped support for is automatic reconnect. Before, if a connection was dropped, the client will try reconnecting, and then if it was successful, then the server would replay all the missed messages it had to the client. This feature is no longer there. Basically, the old feature seemed to be very useful, but the cost to pay was very high, and you still had to handle reconnects yourself in cases where the client could not reconnect within the time window.
Now, you said the cost was high. Is that like performance cost or development cost?
I'm going to explain. So basically, because the server needed to keep a buffer with messages to be able to reply the messages, in case of reconnect. So basically, for each connection, the server contained a ring buffer, which was the default size was 1,000 messages, and whenever a message was sent to the client, it would be stored in this buffer, right? So now when the client, when the connection was dropped and the client was reconnecting, the server could go back and check, and just resend messages that it was buffering. But imagine if you have like many thousand connections connected to a server, and each of them contains this buffer of 1,000 messages. It basically, the memory used by the SignalR server was very high, right? So people were complaining that SignalR was leaking, and oftentimes it was because of these buffers. Also, the client and the server had to, we had this thing called cursors, which basically told it was the point in time or the ID of the last message that was received. So the client stored when the client received a message, it would store the ID for this message, so the cursor. And if reconnects happen, it would send this to the server, and the server would start replaying the messages starting from this cursor, right? One thing that was interesting is that you have this replay feature. But if you decided to make the buffer smaller, or you had a lot of messages, you would still lose messages. You could still lose messages when you are disconnected, because if the buffer was a ring buffer, meaning all those messages will be overwritten by the newer ones. So basically, what would happen is that if you lost more than the worth of the size of the buffer messages, then you would just lose some of the messages completely. So it was a nice feature, but not really working, and required a lot of work on the other side. So we decided we need to take it from the server so that it is much faster. It doesn't use as much memory, and it still can be implemented on by the client, by the customer. We are trying to come up with some ways that will make it easier to implement by the user if they need this functionality. So this is one of the big changes that we made. Another big change that we made was externalizing scale-out. Basically, again, in SignalR, in this old SignalR version, scale-out was built in whether you use it or not. The whole SignalR server was built around a message bus, and you had to pay the cost for having this message bus or being able to scale out an application. The thing was that this scale out was supposed to work for everyone, but it turned out that each application, like if you try to run an application on multiple servers, there is no one way to scale out the application, right? So something that was supposed to work for everyone basically worked for no one really. So we realized, and you had to pay the cost, right? So
I think there's a trend. Basically, we identified a bunch of areas where we attempted to do things for you out of the box by being very general. And they're really things in the vast majority of applications that we saw that should have been solved specifically for that application's workload type. And so we've kind of stripped out a bunch of these opinions about how to do things, and thus fixed a whole bunch of bugs in the process, because a lot of them were very difficult to get right, even generally. And then we'll provide guidance and solutions in other ways for these specific types of solutions, depending on what type of application you have.
Correct.
And so whether that's message replay when a client gets a blip in their logical connection, or whether it's the way the application scales out, there's a few other ones as well. I think what we'll end up with is a more core product in some ways. Like there'll be less things that it does for you out of the box without you having to think about it. But the reality is, with this type of framework, you really should be thinking about how connections stay around connected to your application, what it means when a message is missed, what it means when a connection comes back, a logical connection, not a real one, obviously. Because the reality is connections, physical connections are going to come and go all the time, depending on network conditions, and you need to design for that, depending on what your application does. And then there were other little things that we got rid of, like hub state, which was little used, it didn't really provide a lot of value, but it complicated the protocol. The way the messages were sent between the server and the client. And so that's kind of the theme here. And then there's a lot of good details as well.
It's definitely much leaner than it was before. But I think, because it's much leaner, it's much easier to understand conceptually how it works and what it does.
Yeah.
Okay. One more thing that is important and is in the same kind of theme is that we now require the clients to be the sessions to be sticky, meaning the client can only be connected to one server. And it's kind of similar. It's kind of related to reconnect first, and then also it's related to the thing that the world has moved. Like the original version of SignalR, when it was designed, we kind of thought about the world as in terms of long polling. Now we actually prefer to think of the world, like as of WebSockets, right? So you just open the connection and it's open to the server. It makes much easier to reason about the system overall. For instance, with the old version, when you have free connects and connections were jumping the server, you will have multiple on disconnect messages for the same connection, and people couldn't tell why it was the case and how to handle the situation. Now everything is clear. Either the connection is connected to the server or it isn't. It also is very interesting in case when you have to scale out your application, because if you know that the connection is connected to a server, you know whether to broadcast the message to the, if you want to send a message to a different connection, if it's on the same server, you don't need to send it to other servers to, just so that the message reaches the client. You just know that the client is connected to the server, so you just send a message directly to the connection without broadcasting to each server saying, hey, try to send to this client because I don't know where it actually is. Right. So these are the biggest changes that we decided to make. These are the breaking changes. Now let's talk a little bit about new features that we added. So one of the features is support for custom protocols and binary protocols in general. This was currently you can implement a custom protocol. We keep all the interfaces in the so-called optional way, meaning they are public, but we have an internal namespace. We ship the product out of the box with support for two protocols. One is JSON-based, and the other is message-bug-based. And message-bug is a binary protocol. So this is one of the ways we wanted to make sure that it's actually possible to write a custom protocol. And also, people were asking for binary protocols, especially in the previous version. The size of messages the messages could be pretty big, so people were asking, how can I make them smaller? And in this version, we redesigned the protocol. It's just completely new protocol from scratch. And we also added the support for binary protocols, which make messages much smaller than when using JSON. The important thing is that the protocol is actually documented on GitHub. So we have a spec with the protocol, and it describes all the messages, and how to encode the messages, how they look on the wire depending on the protocol you use. For instance, here are the messages for how they look when you're using message pack. There are some here are how they look when using JSON. So it's not like before where people were asking, hey, what do these all I's or M's or C mean in the messages that I see when I open the developer tools. So now the protocol is fully described. I think you can think about this as a spec. I think actually that this is a feature of the product, to have like clearly described protocol. Another thing that we added is streaming methods. So basically, the server can send stream of data to the client, and it's not like typically you have a single invocation. You invoke a method on the server, and then you get the result back. Streaming is you invoke the method, and the server keeps sending values, the new stream items. Another thing that we actually thought about doing, and we did, was being able to use SignalR with just bare WebSockets.
Particularly happy about this one.
Was it?
I'm particularly happy about this one.
So again, like if you think about the protocol, which was not very well documented, I actually, when I joined the team, I had the same question. People ask on Stack Overflow, what does this protocol look like? What it does? How it works? So I reverse engineered the code because we didn't have any spec, and wrote a blog post describing the protocol. And if you look at this blog post, you will see how heavy and how difficult starting the connection was. It required sending 3 HTTP requests, and it had to be orchestrated, and so on and so forth. So basically, using SignalR without any client was almost impossible, or it was very, 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 very hard, right? So we just didn't want this to happen in this version, especially that we wanted to kind of move towards the WebSockets paradigm. So the starting the connection is very simple. These days, we just send an options request, which contains some data. But if you are using WebSockets, you don't need to send this first initial HTTP request. So basically, you have a WebSocket, you can connect to the server and start sending messages. We have this demo called Social Weather, where we show how to use SignalR with bare WebSockets, and one of the clients is a client running on the Node MCU development board. It has an ESP8266 chip, which basically provides the Wi-Fi, for the board, and then the board itself is using Lua, and we just connect from Lua using WebSockets to SignalR server, and are able to send and receive messages. So the simplified, and we are going to take it a little bit further. Internally, the client currently is using options, even if we are using WebSockets. We are thinking about removing this completely, because this is really not needed. We are sticky. The WebSocket is just a pipe. We have a pipe. We don't need any additional information. We can send and receive messages. So I think this is one more big change is that we now only support one hub per connection. Before, you could have multiple hubs per connection. This is no longer the case. It makes the model easier, and again, like conceptually, you've got like people actually. The vast majority of people thought about single connection as single hub. So we basically made it happen, and we'll see how it goes. I think it is, if you still need multiple hubs per connection, I think it is possible to build some additional layer on top of that, and we might have a sample or something like that showing how you can do that.
So the protocol still allows for it?
The protocol doesn't, but you can build like
you could wrap it yourself.
You could wrap it yourself, and you can have like a dispatching hub.
Yeah, I guess so. That makes sense.
Yeah,
because I mean the sockets layer has no protocol, so you could just do whatever you want there, and then unpack it into the individual streams.
I actually think that you could even do this on top of the hub protocol that we have, just by having a dispatching hub on the server side and kind of a hub proxy counterpart on the client side. And you can say, when you start a connection, you always can send additional data in the query string, so you can provide, if you need more data, if the server needs more data, the client can provide this data. So I think it should be possible. So now I think it's time to take a look at some demos. So first, I will start from the well-known SignalR chat application that we have been using for like many years. It's in the tutorial for the previous version of SignalR. The idea was that we took a number of samples we created for the previous version and tried to move it to the newest version so that we know how hard it is. And then, that things work, and people are familiar with these samples. So I think, it was a good thing to have and to ship. So I will start from the SignalR chat sample. I've got this application somewhere here. I will first start the server just to show that it runs. Right, it needs to compile. Okay, let's go to the site. I will call my user Chrome so that I know who is talking. Let's see that it works. So this is the well-known chat application in the new form, kind of, meaning using the new server and the new client. I actually wrote a blog post. I wrote 2 blog posts about SignalR Client. The first one is my experience of taking the application from the tutorial, which was here. This is the tutorial for the for the previous version. Basically, you can see that the interface is the same. I just took the hub and took the client and just tried to convert it to JavaScript, and then converted it to TypeScript so that you can see how to use the client from the TypeScript applications. So if you look at the code over there, if you look at the chat hub, is basically a copy of what we had here. We tried to keep the API as close as to what we had before. If you just look at this chat hub, is identical. I just changed some usings because you are no longer we no longer need system.web, or we no longer use ASP.NET namespace. New SignalR is in the ASP.NET Core namespace. But other than that, this is basically the same thing. And then let's take a look at the so the HTML code is again like just copied directly from here. Only that because I'm using I'm using now TypeScript, I don't have this JavaScript code in HTML, and I converted it to TypeScript. Okay, so this is the TypeScript, and this is how you can see how you use the connection. You need to create a new hub connection, and then you subscribe to handlers. So whenever a client-side method is being invoked, you will be called on your handler will be called. You register it using the on method on the client. And then here is how you start the connection. We are using promises, so you have then and a catch to catch the exception, then to run a continuation. Actually, if you are using TypeScript, and I will show this in a different client, you can use Async Await. This is the feature of TypeScript. It makes it it makes your code much easier to write. It's much more linear. It's very similar to C# async await feature, whereas promises are actually very close to the C++ parallel task library, where you have, again, similar. You attach.
Can you zoom in just one layer? People are asking.
How do I do that?
Just
here?
Control plus.
Control plus.
Just like a browser. Yeah.
All right. So this is how you start the connection, and then after we start the connection, we send the we attach the click, and whenever a user clicks, write the message, clicks the send button, we'll invoke the server, the method on the server side, and that's pretty much it. So this is my browser client, but I also wrote the Node client for that, because with the removal of jQuery, we are now able to take the client outside the browser. And one of the I think environments people were interested in running the client in was Node.js. So I've got this small client Node. And again, like I used TypeScript. I originally wrote it in JavaScript, and then converted the JavaScript to TypeScript. And again, I wrote a post about that on my blog, which shows how to each step of the process is being described and shown, and it has a commit number, so you can see the div. You can basically follow it. You can clone the repo. You can try it on your own. So let's start the Node client, and then we'll look a little bit in the Node client. I got it. It's down there. Now I need to let's use Node client. So now I can see that my client is connected to the server using the WebSocket transport, and it's using JSON Hub protocol, and I can send messages. So you can see that I receive messages. Then if we go back to our web client, you'll see that the message that the client received the messages, and if we send from Chrome, then you can see that the Node client received the Chrome message. So things work end to end. I actually yesterday debugged a React Native app. Someone had problems with running the client in React Native, and it was running in an iOS emulator on Mac, and I was able to make it work. So the client can work outside the browser. One important thing that when using Node is that the client does not have hard dependency on jQuery or on the browsers, but it still uses some libraries that typically are available in browsers, but not in Node. For instance, we need to send like HTTP requests, or if you have WebSockets, these are not available by default, but you can polyfill them. So in my case, I just stuck them on the global object, and then this way they become available. We are thinking about changing this because it's a bit ugly, right? So we are thinking how we can, I don't know, maybe we can use some dependency injection or constructor injections, or you can set some of these in the options when you start the connection, and this is what we use so that you don't have to stick things on the global object. So this was the chat application. Now let's take a look at the stock ticker. This is another sample that we had before. It's a little bit different from what we had before, because now it is using the streaming feature, and that's why I would like to show it. But from the outside, it will just look the same as the old stock ticker. By the way, we have this SignalR samples repo in the ASP.NET org, And this repo contains all the samples that we converted from the previous version, and you can go and you can go and check, clone the repo, and play with the samples, and see what we had to do to make the samples run. Okay, where we are. Let's start the server. Right, let's go to the browser. Oh, it's still compiling. All right. We can open the market, and then you can see that we start receiving notifications, and these notifications are actually being sent using the new streaming feature. And we also have a node client for that.
No, I didn't see. Is that a marquee tag down at the bottom? That's really impressive.
No. I wrote that manually.
Yeah.
Using jQuery back in the day, but then Brandon has updated it now to not use jQuery. I believe I asked him to use CSS animations. Yes. I believe that's what he's doing now. We tried CSS transitions, but it wasn't powerful enough to get the effect we have here. So we are doing full-on CSS animations.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess we could have done it in SVG to go really all out. We could do an actual graph and have it animate. That'd be pretty cool.
Right. Pull request incoming.
Pull request incoming.
Okay, let's take a look.
I know we didn't update the stock prices yet either.
Okay, I think we did.
Oh, we did?
I checked it.
Oh, we did. No, we did. You did.
Nice.
I actually want to do a live version of this. Like, there should be a button that's like connect, and you have to, but you have to do more in the demos. Like you have to like put in a Yahoo key or something. Like, I'm assuming most of those APIs would require you to have a authentication of some sort, but it'd be nice to actually have a live one rather than this canned one that we do all the time with the random number generator.
All right, and this the node client is also in the repo, so let's just start the node client here, and you can see that it's getting updates. Let's see, you've got price 923. Now it changed to 925, so it's just working. And as well, we also have the C# client for that. It will take a few seconds to start. All right, and there you go. You've got the stock prices being updated lifetime. So I think, we have all the samples. People can start and play and can ask questions. I created a new tag on Stack Overflow, SignalR-core. It makes it easier because APIs are similar, and sometimes I was not sure whether people were asking about the old version or the new version. So if anyone is asking questions on Stack Overflow, please use SignalR-core for the new SignalR and the SignalR for the previous version. File issue, try it and file issues on GitHub. We are looking into these issues because we want to make it really solid. It's much easier to use, much easier to understand conceptually how it works. It may require more work on the user side to get support for some features that we decided to remove. Yeah, I think it's pretty much what I had.
Awesome.
Now it's you mentioned that you've removed support for some things that were more complicated, like message replay and that kind of thing. Yeah. Are there samples that show how to do that? Is there?
We don't have samples yet, but we are thinking about building ones, and we are thinking about possibly adding some features to the protocol or to the stack to make it easier if it turns out to be really hard.
Yeah, we basically want to enable people to add things on top of the new base functionality, and that means that's why we went to this work to put an alpha out on 2.0 rather than waiting for the 2.1 wave. Like, a lot of this requires, now that we have a strict protocol that's documented, and we have multiple implementations of that protocol, it has to be flexible enough, and it has to be designed into the protocol layer in order for you guys to you should stop sharing your screen. In order for people to be able to actually add features on top in a protocol supported way. So yeah,
cool.
You can flip back to the Hangouts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got some questions coming in here.
All right. So I have to run off to a meeting in a couple of minutes, and so.
All right.
We have some questions.
Well, so some people were asking about things like media and WebRTC or OpenRTC and stuff like that. I would think that makes sense more for like, you might use SignalR to like point at the stream, but you would directly use those media delivery.
Well, yeah, I mean, I answered some of this in the chat, but WebRTC is specifically a peer-to-peer technology, which is designed around being able to send streams of information between two browsers on different machines. But it doesn't work without a server sort of doing the handshaking and locating of the other people or the other person. And they call that signaling in the WebRTC sort of world. And so you're supposed to use some other channel to do the signaling, and obviously a SignalR connection would be perfect for that. Because SignalR isn't peer-to-peer. SignalR is very much client-server, and we have symmetry now. The protocol is bidirectional, whereas it wasn't fully bidirectional before. Some features were only available in one way, but the protocol now supports basically all features in both directions, no matter who established the connection, which means you can do things like have the server call a method on the client and get a response, which we never supported before. Now, that said, it doesn't mean it's a peer-to-peer technology, because that requires like support in the browser. Now, is it possible we could build a WebRTC transport such that you could basically start a SignalR client in one browser, have it go to the server, negotiate with the other client that you're actually trying to address, and then kind of do the link up for you all transparently, so that just using the SignalR API, you end up with a stream to the other browser? Possibly. We could certainly look at doing things like that. For now, I think what you'll see us do is at some point we'll put together an example of what it means to use SignalR with WebRTC to build a video chat app like this, or just an audio chat app or something like that. But they're different technologies for different purposes right now. What was the other one?
Okay, yeah, maybe we can run through a few real quick. Yeah. So one was roadmap update, if they're looking at 2.01 release timeframe.
I updated the roadmap yesterday in only one way. I moved the 2.1 quarter out to Q1, Q2 of 2018. It's not going to be the end of this year.
Okay.
Yep.
Vladislav was asking about authentication with SignalR. Is it like MVC controllers?
Yep. So authorization is exactly the same. You use the authorize attribute on your hub method or on your hub class, and it results in that being challenged or requiring authentication depending on what policy you provide. That we're still discussing in issues around how you actually do authentication, because if you're using cookies, it's all pretty straightforward. If you're not using cookies, which is often best practice for when doing Sparse or any type of JavaScript access from the browser, things get a little more complicated, because WebSockets doesn't allow you to send anything in the header, in custom headers from the WebSocket JavaScript API. Like, it's just not possible. There's literally no way to set a header. And so the only mechanism you have for sending data is in the query string of the URL, or over the WebSocket channel itself once it's been established. So we are exploring both of those. The query string one is pretty well known. Like, you should be using HTTPS anyway, regardless of this, but you should be using HTTPS. Once you're using HTTPS, the entire connection is encrypted, which means that the query string is opaque to anyone between the browser and the server. Like, no one can see the token that's going through the query string, because the query string is part of the encrypted channel. That said, the query string itself will get logged in the server, because if you have web server logging turned on, the full URL will often get logged, and so the token will leak into logs up there. But this is not a unique problem for SignalR. This is a WebSockets issue in general. So the token in the query string approach works. The sending the token as the first payload over the actual WebSocket once it's established would work in theory. We've never actually written that sample. I've often talked about us doing it. In fact, I brought it up again in this issue. I think we should do that and just demonstrate whether it's even, figure out whether it's even possible. Right. And if it is that some type of boilerplate that we could codify a little better into, maybe not first class, but at least have a good example that shows you, if you have a coordinated client, then after you establish the connection, you could call a special method on your hub, or maybe you can have a special hub manager that you create and plug in. And then all your authentication is wrapped up in one place, and then any other method call that the client tried to do, if they didn't do that, would just throw and shut the connection down. So yeah, it's complicated. WebSockets authentication, unfortunately, is just limited because of the way the API is shaped, but we're looking at it.
Event source has the same problem.
Event source has the same issue. Yep.
Okay, cool. Chat's asking where he can find the code samples that were just demoed. So I know you pointed to the blog post.
It's in GitHub, ASP.NET, SignalR.samples.
Cool. Let me see. Georgie's asking if it's okay to use Ihub Activator to create Hub instances in the API controller in the same app and call Hub methods.
You actually should inject Ihub context.
Yep.
And then you can use, it's kind of similar to what global host was before, only that is using dependency injection, and then you can call client methods directly from Hub context.
Okay, cool. Let me see. Can we set receive query params or headers during connection?
Well, on the server side or the client side? So on the client side, you're limited by whatever the transport it is that you're connecting with. On the server side, you could put middleware in front of the ASP.NET, the SignalR/sockets middleware and fiddle with the request before we get it. But yeah, that doesn't really change. But like as we just said, WebSockets, you can't change headers. Like this is not available. It's nothing you can do. Event source, you can't change headers. So yes, you can do query strings because that just goes in the URL you give us. But headers are just unfortunately something that's very difficult to do or impossible to do.
Cool. I'll try and get two more real quick. One is Kai's asking how much MVC will there be in SignalR core? Things like model binding from services.
To be determined. Right now, none. We did a couple of investigations, a couple of sort of experiments on could we just get rid of hubs completely and do everything in controllers, and they fell flat for a few reasons. That said, there's a lot of subsystems of MVC like model binding and input validation and those type of things that would, obviously would make sense. It's like, oh, well, why wouldn't that? And it just seems like you should be able to use that, or we could reuse that. It's not particularly well factored enough for us to do those type of things today. Honestly, I think where it'll land right now is in 2.1 or 2.x. I don't think you'll see that, but maybe in some super future version of ASP.NET Core where more of the MVC isms become more of the core, like dispatching, which we're talking about doing for 2.1, which is kind of routing in the core. And the idea of RPC bot model binding and those type of things being in the core, then we would be able to reuse them, but probably not for now.
Great. Okay, well, we're a little after 11, and I know you had run off to a meeting.
I do.
Well, should we do the dramatic zoom out?
Yes, lock on.
Okay.
Button. I am ready and awaiting your
I'm locked. You're going to sing this time, right?
Community stand up, zoom out, it's so dramatic.